Ki te katoa. Haumie, huie.
Taiki.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. So, apologies today. I have two apologies for early departure, one from James Goff at 3 p.m. and also Jake at 3 p.m. Any others wanting to bail out early? Do I have a mover for those? Phil? Seconder for the apologies, please. Tim, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed, that's carried. Welcome, Andrew, we've just started. That's all right. And just a reminder, if you have any declarations of interest, to speak up at the appropriate time, or even better now if you have one. Item 3, confirmation of previous minutes. Do I have a mover for those? Tim, second. Mel, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed, that's carried. There's no public forum. But today we have one deputation from Avril Stevenson. She's the Commercial and Compliance Manager from Eco Central, and she's going to present an item to us of interest in relation to item 10, which is the resource report. So welcome, Avril. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you. Try not to hit myself getting in. All right. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for allowing me to come in to present to you today. As you know, Eco Central is 100% owned by Christchurch City Council through the holdings companies. So we sit alongside the airport, the port company, and Citycare. Christchurch City Council are also our biggest customer, and we value greatly our relationship and work that we do with the operational team here at the Three Waters. Eco Central employs approximately 100 staff. And as part of that team, my role is to find sustainable destinations for good quality sorted, baled recycling. Next slide. So pre-COVID, we were taking recycling from Christchurch, Waimakariri, Selwyn, Ashburton, Mackenzie, Westland councils. We were also taking in commercial recycling from companies in the waste management sector within Christchurch. We were processing approximately 200 tonnes of recycling a day, receiving 40 to 50 trucks, and the recycling plant, 30 people were working Monday to Friday, 10-hour days. We were producing approximately 20 to 40 containers each week of baled material and selling locally where we could. What we noticed pre-lockdown was that there was a marked increase in the amount of rubbish in the recycling. So normally we would call it waste, but we need to call it what it is. It was rubbish. And it just didn't ease off. So we saw levels of contamination up to 35% and increasing. That was pre-lockdown. We became very concerned about our team handling so much recycling and particularly handling so much waste, and particularly the types of waste that we were receiving. And coupling this with the potential for the virus to be on the recycling, mindful of the threat that posed to our staff, and that international markets were closing their borders due to the COVID virus issues they were dealing with. Next slide. Based on those factors, we had to make the difficult decision to cease processing on the 1st of April, which was probably quite timely, April Fool's Day. We were able to recommence recycling on the 4th of May, but unfortunately we haven't recovered, and in fact we're probably going downhill since pre-COVID days. So what does not recovered look like? Well, it looks like 42% of all loads received are going to landfill. So that's every load from Christchurch City Council comes to us, to the receiving hall at the recycling plant. It's tipped on the floor, it's inspected by our staff and rejected or accepted depending on what we see, and 42% of those trucks are going to landfill. We're not accepting recycling from some other contributing councils, and that's due simply to the high levels of contamination in their recycling. According to the Christchurch City website, ratepayers have paid over $1 million to send landfill recycled material to landfill that's been rejected from our plant. And the operational issues stem from having to keep 30 people busy and in useful employment when we're not processing recycling. So the public may ask, well, what's the issue with that? And the issue with that is that the markets have reopened. In fact, mills are hungry for feedstock. They can't get enough paper to run their plants, given that other countries are still in significant lockdown and not processing recycling. So we're in a prime opportunity at the moment to maximise our sales by selling to those countries. They have very high expectations of quality. And we have outstanding long-term contracts with reputable brokers that we can't fulfil. There's limited stock available because of the contamination that we're receiving in the loads. It's particularly frustrating for us that with mills in desperate need of good feedstock, where demand outstrips supply, that we can't supply product to them. Next slide. So what's the issue with that? We've got a recycling plant, let's sort it. Well, the plant sorts by size and shape, and it sorts recycling very well. It doesn't sort rubbish at all. So any rubbish that comes through the plant that's round will be sorted as a container. Any rubbish that comes through that's flat will be sorted as paper. And anything that does not belong in the recycling must be pulled off by hand, by a person. Next slide. So what sort of things are we taking off the line? That's a very good question. There's three significant things that are causing us issue. There's general waste, there's food scraps, and there's the soft films and flimsy packaging. The general waste, we're finding nappies, dead animals, guns, washing baskets, vacuum cleaners, chainsaws, seat belts. Anything you could put in the rubbish, we're finding in the recycling. Food scraps are a particular issue. As you can appreciate, rotten vegetables and fruit will contaminate recycling quite quickly when it smears all over them. Potato peels and bread do initially the same thing. Soft films are a big problem for us as it sorts through the plant as paper because it's flat. It ends up in the recycling stream for paper, and the paper mills have zero tolerance to any soft films in the recycling. By the time the rubbish has gone into the yellow bin, it's essentially too late for us to do anything with it because it's contaminated all of the recycling. And then the truck load is ruined and sent for landfill. So what would help us? It would help us greatly that residents take responsibility for their recycling at their gate, that they're held accountable for it, that if it's not accepted, they don't put it in the red bin, that they check out the CCC website for the most up-to-date information, that they download the CCC app, which is very good, that they make some proactive choices where they're buying packaged goods, and if it's not recyclable, don't buy it. That would much better resolve the issues that we face and allow us to do our job at recycling good quality material. From the data we've collected, we can see that the recycling we accept is getting better, indicating that residents who want to do the right thing are changing their habits. But the number of rejected loads tells us that a lot of residents are refusing to improve. So we'd like to see an increase in auditing at the curbside so that those residents who are contaminating everyone else's recycling can be identified, and that there's a push forward for removing bins at a much quicker rate for those who refuse to be educated. Next slide. So in summary, I guess I'd like to say that the recycling plant is only part of the solution, that residents can resolve the situation very quickly, that we maintain good relationships with reputable brokers, and we have long-term sustainable homes for good quality recycling. I just need to get my hands on some good quality recycling. So thank you.
Oh, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. We are still doing the curbside auditing, and we've got a program in place where if there are repeat offenders, they'll have their bin removed. So we've just got to keep up with the data coming back from that to see how we're progressing. So hopefully we'll see improvement. Questions? Right, we've got a few. We'll go Jake, Aaron, Tim, and then Jimmy Yanni.
I appreciate that because I put my hand up last. How much of your operations have been impacted by the change to allowing people over COVID to put anything in any bin, and how far on the journey of getting back to normality are we?
Well, the allowing of rubbish into the recycling has had a huge impact to us, and I know that the council said it once, but people are very good at remembering the one thing that you don't necessarily want them to continue doing, despite repeated attempts to get them to change their behaviour. What we've seen that the residents that are confused have already made that change, and that's why we're seeing an improvement in the quality of the recycling that we are receiving. But the number of bins that we're still rejecting indicates that there's still a lot of people out there that are refusing to make that change, and that's the only word I can use, refusing, because they have received a lot of education over the last few months, But it has had a huge impact. There are 30 people working at the plant who are used to working 50-hour weeks. Their hours have been reduced, and they're now doing jobs that are less productive to keep them busy. So it has had a huge impact.
A huge impact. Aaron?
Yeah, so mine's just around the glass. How does the glass not contaminate the paper and plastics all the time? Like, you must get a lot of broken glass in the trucks, like from not my house, but my human neighbours, and the bins, just all this crashing glass of various alcoholic vessels.
Yeah, so
Phil's house, I live near Phil.
it does limit where we can sell the paper to. So our paper, the paper that we sell will never be made back into a cereal box or those sorts of things, or any food grade type of material. But having said that, there are still a lot of mills that will take our material who are making industrial type packaging or industrial inner cores and things like that don't require it to be glass free. If the glass was out of the recycling, it would allow us to have a wider market for it though.
If the glass was separate.
Separate,
Yeah.
yes.
So for the other products, or the glass as well?
By the time the plastics gets to the end of the line, so when the machine sorts, it takes paper and cardboard out. So that would, if there was going to be any glass, that would be where the biggest risk was. By the time the plastics have moved further down the line, the audits indicate that there's no glass left in that stream.
Right, and I know this will sound like a comedy skit, but with the dead animals in the bin, has anyone gone and knocked on someone's door and asked how you recycle that?
Where we can identify...
What was the outcome?
Yeah, so where we can identify where the animal has come from, and ducks shooting season's finished, so the ducks have stopped, thankfully, and lambing's finished or finishing, so the lambs have stopped. But where we can identify where those things have come from, it's certainly reported back to the contributing councils, and they definitely make approaches.
Right, are they allowed in green waste?
Animals aren't allowed in green waste, no.
Okay, just checking.
Thanks.
They are, cool.
Tim?
Thank you. Two quick ones. Just following on from Aaron's. So if we had separate bins for glass and paper and then other recycling, would that make your job a lot easier?
Assuming there wasn't more rubbish thrown in the 3 separate bins, yes.
Okay, so that would be something to look at perhaps in the future. The other one was with the contamination, and someone mentioned we can take up their bin or whatever, but there's a group, there is a percentage of people that just don't care. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So, that would be interesting to take their bins away or whatever. But then again, they're just going to be dumping rubbish, so what's the point? Just give them a big red bin.
That's right, but that costs us more as well. Jimmy?
Okay, thank you. 2 questions. First one, you mentioned 42% of loads to the landfill. The people is put on the red bin or is put on the yellow bin. So made a mistake or still the yellow bin. You still need to process those one. 42%.
42%, yes, are too contaminated for us to process.
In a yellow bin.
Yellow bin, yes.
Oh, so high percentage. But my understanding at the moment, all the red bin have put on the stickers. Am I right? So now probably this situation can be improved.
I guess the issue is for some households, and who maybe aren't so ethical in their recycling habits, that when their red bin is full, they simply use the yellow bin as a second rubbish bin. So anything that would go in the rubbish bin when it's full is ending up in the yellow bin. So that's one of our problems.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Thanks. Yanni?
Okay. Thank you.
I'm just trying to understand how much worse the scale got, a bit similar to the question that Councillor McClellan asked. With the before COVID-19, what was the contamination rate? And after the decision telling people to put rubbish in the yellow bin, what's the contamination rate
so
difference?
prior to the average refuse rate in the recycling was sitting around 8% on average. There would be some loads that would be over and some loads that would be under, but on average it was 8% in the recycling. And we can only process maximum of 10% contamination in the recycling. So anything over that has to be rejected, and that's where the 42% of the trucks comes in.
So what is it now?
Well, we're only accepting anything from 10% and under. Anything over 10% is rejected. We don't run it through the plant.
Sorry, what
I
was the
think Yanni's
rejection?
asking
What was
it-
the rejection rate before COVID-19? Telling people to put it was 8%.
8%.
But that's not the rejection rate, that's the contamination rate.
That's correct.
The rejection, I'm just trying to understand the difference.
The truck rejection rate?
Yeah, the
Sorry.
truck-
So in
yeah.
the last 12 months, we had rejected, I think, 3 loads.
And I think what Yanni's asking is, we currently send 42% to the landfill. What was the percentage pre-COVID?
Less than 1%.
Less than 1%.
In one 12-month period, we only sent 3 trucks out of all of the Christchurch collections to landfill.
And now we're sending 42, right? And then my follow-up question is, were you engaged or consulted on the messaging around telling people to put rubbish into the recycling?
I believe that happened outside of Eco Central.
Yeah, this is part
We had
of
a
our
workshop
plan.
on it,
Yep.
but wouldn't you talk to the people that are doing the service? Like, I can't quite comprehend that.
Anyway, is that the end of your questions? James, I think we'll have to make this the last question. Yeah.
Christ. We don't talk to our companies.
The international markets have reopened. What's the risk of them closing again on us?
I guess there's always a risk of that if they have a second outbreak, etc., etc. But we're hopeful. You know, we have to keep plugging away with the orders. We're committed to those contracts. They're dying. You know, they're crying out for good material. So we'll keep shipping as long as we've got a sustainable home for it. That's always a possibility.
Okay. And maybe I should know this, but can you clarify who does the auditing? Is it council or Eco Central?
At the curbside, the council's in charge of that, contracting to waste management, I believe.
Yeah, waste management.
Right. So do we know how many bins have been removed?
I don't have that information with
We
me,
can
sorry. Mm.
find that out if you like.
Can we
Yeah,
get
we'll get a
that?
memo out. Yeah,
Right,
and the other
thanks.
thing, Avril, just following up from Yanni's question, perhaps the question might be, are there any messages that we might have missed that you might think would be more helpful to people?
Well, I think all the messaging has sort of been done, and I think
Yep.
possibly people have been over-messaged, if you like, but, you know, with recycling, because they have some, you know, bigger issues to deal with on their plate.
Yep.
But it's just unfortunate that with any education there has to be some sort of stick. And if people don't want to make the change, we really can't continue receiving the waste and the contamination in the bins and hope to have a sustainable market for it. It's just not going to fly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the knock-on effect from this contamination is huge, and it's affecting jobs out there as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that's been incredibly interesting. Thank you very much for your time to come in.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move on to, there's no petitions, and we've got the minutes of the zone committees. We've got, that's items 7, 8, 9, and I'll move those all together. Do I have a seconder for those minutes? Sam? Any discussion on those? All right, I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? That's carried. And that takes us nicely to item 10, which is the resource recovery report. And we welcome Rowan and Josh. They're not here yet. What happened to them? They were here a minute ago. They're having a second long lunch.
Adam's gonna.
Adam,
Yeah, please, thanks.
would you like to move it? Yeah. Seconded, Jake. Any discussion?
Oh, we had loads in there. I was told off for the loads.
That is interesting what Avril said about, you know, the carrot and the stick. So the education has been the carrot, and we need to look more at the stick now. I know. Well, are there any questions?
Yeah, I was just...
There are questions.
The RFID tags, like, have you guys read that? That we're not getting the benefits because of unreliable data.
Yes, I read that, and also I had a question about the other type of tag as well. I'm not sure what it is.
I mean, I'm happy for staff to chase that up separately, but I think we should be getting a memo on it because that's a huge investment that we made, and not to, you know, I mean, it's just a common occurrence in this place, isn't it?
Here we are. Hi, guys.
Sorry, around that.
Thank you. All right, so Yanni has a question about the tags.
Yeah, can you just I was quite concerned to read that the RFID bin tag program has not delivered on all the agreed outcomes due to unreliable data collection, and I was just trying to understand what that means, considering that we put a huge investment into doing that, and maybe we could get a memo about what's actually gone wrong.
Yeah, we can absolutely provide that update. I mean, effectively, it's that we've got the final 2% of bins that still require tagging. So we've closed out some 450,000 bins with new tags in them, so we know exactly where those bins are. But there's still a number of bins that haven't had a tag because they haven't been presented. So I guess a big push from the contractor this next 6 months is to get tags in those final 10,000 bins, which is 2% of the stock. So 5,000 of those bins are green bins. So what happens is they don't get presented every week, particularly over winter, and so they've been missed, when the RFID tagging team have been out there. So spring, perfect time to capture those green bins that have been missed so that we can have a complete data set. In terms of the technology, there are some issues there, and we're trying to pull that information into what's called an API, but basically it's so that we get the live data from the collection truck so that we can use that to understand, where a collection route is in terms of completion, and so that we can potentially bring that information into things like our mobile app. And so that's the data stuff that we're just working through at the moment with the contractor. But we can certainly put it all into a more detailed memo for you all.
I think one improvement to the app, which it sounds like you're working on, would be actually people knowing whether the collection's been or not, because often people will forget to put it out, and it'd be quite an incentive for people to look at using it. Yep, cool, thanks. Just the only other question, I guess, was just around the whole recycling issue. Are we able to get some sense of how you're working with Eco Central around messaging, around recycling?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a shared communications campaign with Eco Central. I'm not sure if Avril touched on that just then. So Council's communications team are working with Eco Central's communications team, and they've got a shared approach. Effectively, we don't want different messaging going out between the two parties, and that relates to the neighbouring councils as well. But we also recognise that Eco Central are the source of truth, they are the people processing this material, so we really need to make sure that they've got the right messaging and that we align with that. So that is certainly in process.
Just if we had another emergency or a disaster or something, a pandemic, do we have Eco Central as kind of a key stakeholder in our response plans? Like, how are they involved in the response planning?
Yeah, so we are. So we have a pandemic response plan in the Resource Recovery Business Unit with each of our contractors, so that we understand how they're going to action, how they're going to, I guess, progress in that pandemic situation. So certainly Eco Central are a key stakeholder, as are Living Earth and Waste Management, the three major contracts.
Right, Jimmy.
One question. What's the time frame? Particular staff mentioned, now is investigate more flexibility for residents regarding the different capacity options can minimize those waste. Particularly earlier, the Eco Central they present to us create 42% waste from yellow bin. It's quite serious. So what's the time frame for flexibility, different options to meet the people's needs?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the contamination issue is a huge issue, and it's costing council a lot of money at the moment. Sending almost half of the material we collect for recycling to landfill has a higher cost. We've got a whole raft of communications around that, but in terms of the actual bin options, that's what we're looking at. With both the waste minimisation and management plan that we've just run through public consultation, and the service delivery review, which is going to follow immediately on from that. So what we're looking at is, are there better charging mechanisms, and are there better, bin options that we should be offering residents? Our neighbouring councils do this with opt-in, opt-out services, and the ability to change up and down your bin sizes more easily. And so we're looking at that just to see that we can actually provide residents with the fit-for-purpose service. So in terms of timeline, I guess it is rates funded, so we'd need to put it into the next rates policy, the next rate cycle. Thank you.
Right. I had a question on the Burwood resource recovery, and there is quite an interesting table there about the landfill gas and the value of that in dollars at 944,467. Is there any way we can actually also calculate our saved carbon emissions?
Yeah, I believe there's an internal program for capturing the carbon, the carbon accounting.
Yeah.
So it's not our business unit, but we can definitely come back to you on that in terms of the carbon benefit of using that landfill gas as an alternative fuel.
Yeah, well, that could be fed into your committee, Sarah, because I think we need to get these this data. Yeah. So that would be really helpful. And then also with how long has that facility got to go? Aren't we closing that?
So it's two slightly separate elements, I guess. So
Yeah.
the landfill gas catcher is the former Burwood landfill.
Yeah.
And so that obviously ceased operation in the 90s, and we've got there's a peak supply of landfill gas that's going to come off that site.
Yeah.
And so we do have declining landfill gas off that. So we are seeing, in the future, we're not going to have that source of landfill gas for this purpose.
Yeah.
The BRRP stuff is around the actual site operation, and that's due to conclude this year.
Right. So the landfill gas is diminishing from there.
Yeah. So the landfill gas, I don't have the exact details, but we've sort of, I guess, modelled that decline in landfill gas over the coming years.
So what are we going to do here? Don't we use it here in this building?
Yeah, it's
So
charging.
there are people looking at that, and there is a report being looked at it in the next 2 to 3 months.
Okay. All right. And also in the rehabilitation planting at Burwood, around 60,000 native plants have been planted. Is that a community project as well? Are we working with volunteers plantings as well?
I'm not sure I can come back to you on whether there's community aspect. There's certainly a contract for landfill remediation and rehabilitation.
Yeah,
and so that is with a commercial contractor, but I don't know whether community groups are also involved in that planting.
Well, sounds like a perfect opportunity to me. Wouldn't the Coastal Burwood Community Board be involved in that?
I guess the only concerns may be that it is still an operational facility. We're still receiving material at that facility,
safety.
so I'm sure it can be managed. But
Right, okay. And the only other thing, I was just wondering if you could perhaps give us a bit of an overview on the progress with the organics processing plant, please.
Yep, absolutely. So we've got a slide which is the timeline for the Bromley Oda project, and so if we can bring that up on screen, we could just walk you through, I guess, the process with the Living Earth and EcoCentral sites at Bromley.
Yep.
Yeah. So effectively, we've been working with Environment Canterbury, the regulator, on the Bromley Oda issue since about, in this iteration anyway, since sort of November last year. So really looking at the public concern around odour from those two sites, and trying to understand, what the sources of the odour is, and whether we can improve our operations to reduce odour at those sites. This culminated in a trial, or a pilot, which ran from March through to May.
No, it's just for the month of March.
Just for the month of March, sorry. And that was really looking at community feedback on odour in the community, and understanding, where that was coming from. So a whole data modelling sort of project which showed where the complaints were coming from and what the likely sources of it were. Through that process, ECAM presented to us that they believed it to be our two sites operating in Bromley, so the Metro Place transfer station and the organics processing plant, our composting facility. And so what we undertook then was an adaptive management plan, so basically looking at our operations to understand if there was anything we could do to tweak the processes at both sites to reduce odour from those sites, to improve, the level of odour in the community. Now we've just gone through 3 months of evaluating those operational changes at the two sites, and what Environment Canterbury, the regulator, have come back saying is that they're comfortable with the improvements made at the transfer station. So they believe we've reduced odour coming from the transfer station and it meets those permitted activity rules. So effectively we've been able to demonstrate that the transfer station, with some operational changes, can continue to operate. What they've come back saying is that they still feel there is an odour issue from the organics processing plant. And so what we're doing is, firstly, we're waiting for the improvements made in the last 3 months to be realised. So that's over 20 different changes to the process were trialled in isolation. And what the operator settled on was a new recipe which combined 10 of those processes. And so that's everything from kind of the way the material is mixed, the amount of time it spends in the tunnels, the amount of time it's turned, the amount of water, oxygen, all of those aspects. So they've kind of had a really detailed look at the operations to understand how they could change the odour profile of the product produced. They have confidence in this new recipe, and they've committed to starting to produce it to that spec. We've started to see some of that material and the tests from it, show that it has a different profile. But we're right at the early stages where we've only got, I believe, 7% of that material on site, which means there's 93% of the old recipe still maturing on site, which means we haven't seen those changes yet, but we're confident that changes will come. So we're kind of at that point where we've made the operational changes, we're waiting to realise those improvements, but we're also aware that, this site is 11 years old. There is better practice out there internationally now on how to run a plant like this. And so what we're doing is we've got an options study out which will investigate each of the options, including a 2015 report by council, so that we can have absolutely everything on the table to bring it to you guys in November so that you can make a decision on how we move forward with the plant. I guess at the same time, we're hoping that these operational improvements will have improved the odour to a point where it may not require that investment come November, but we're going to give you all of the information for that decision at that time.
And by November, the percentage, the recipe will be nearly 90%.
Yeah, I think in the 90s. So what we're saying is that at the end of October, we'll be at over 50%. So we will start to see a marked difference in the tone of odour produced from the facility. And that's where we'll start to get a real flavour of if the improvements are going to make a significant difference.
Right.
But at the same time, we'd need to present you with the technical options in terms of plant upgrades, the capital expenditure associated with those, so that you guys can make an informed decision, based on, I guess, a level playing field of all the facts.
That's encouraging. I think that's really good progress. And also the community can still respond with that smelt app in the meantime.
Absolutely.
And being encouraged to do that.
Environment Canterbury have developed the smelt it platform for this site and another site in Kashmir, and they're continuing to operate that. And that just provides real-time data on what people are perceiving in the environment, which is really helpful for us, because then we can tie that to any operational changes, wind direction, all of that type of thing. And we've now got over 4 months of data through that, crowdsourced data, which is really helpful for when we're evaluating whether improvements have occurred.
Right. Well, that's great. Are there any questions on that from anyone? No? Oh, Yanni.
Sorry, just to be clear though, there's been no improvement to the odour in the 3 months. It's gotten worse.
Yeah, so the improvements are to the operational process, but that material takes, I believe, 16 weeks in the current process to go through its maturation on site. And so, although we've selected a preferred process or recipe, that material is only just coming out of the tunnels now, whereas we've still got the last 16 weeks of maturing material on site.
I get that, but what I don't quite comprehend is with all the other stuff, the non-recipe interventions, why the problem's getting worse rather than improving.
The majority of the changes on site have been the recipe, so that includes things like turning frequency, the temperature, changes in the tunnel and things like that. The main other aspect we've been looking at is the misters, there's been multiple new water misters that have been hired. There's the potential they have made some difference, but it seems that they've made little
Marginal.
difference to, or the difference has been marginal at this stage. But the recipe changed because of the volume of product on site. That's our best chance of reducing the odour through the operational changes.
It's worth also noting that our contractor has commissioned an independent study of their operating practices to understand if there's anything that they are doing on site that could be improved. So they really are, both the contractor and ourselves are looking at every option to improve the facility. It just will take some time, unfortunately.
I guess the question the community has, and I certainly have, is didn't we do this in 2015? Like, didn't we get best practice and have Becca do a report that showed a whole bunch of things that could be done to try and deal with these issues? So,
and since then, there's been a process of kind of continuous improvement at the facility. So there's been multiple things that have happened over the past kind of 5 years.
right. But I get that. But then why is the problem getting worse? That's what people struggle to understand. We did the thing in 2015. But the problem has been getting worse in the last few years rather than improving. And now people are saying, well, you're just doing the same thing you did in 2015 and we're still not seeing any improvement.
There has been a steady decrease in complaints over the last 5 years. So, I guess we need more information on how the odour at that facility is getting worse. What we've seen through this, crowdsourced data and opening it up to public feedback is we've got much more detailed feedback on when and where the occurrences are happening, so we can actually identify the sources of that odour, and that's really helping us to target in on what changes we can make. For example, targeting in on the maturation, so the outdoor windrowing, rather than the biofilter or the screening shed, because those haven't been the trajectories that have been identified for odour. So there's a lot more detail we're getting out of this approach, the combined approach with Environment Canterbury, that we perhaps didn't have back in 2015. In 2015, we looked at options for site redevelopment, whereas now we're really trying to understand what is happening at the site to inform redevelopment.
Okay, and then the final question in this regard is, when do you think residents will stop noticing the offensive odour? Like, when best case scenario, can the residents go, actually, we're not noticing the offensive odour?
So the current projections in this timeline are that at the end of October we'll have 54% of the material on site of the new recipe. At that point, residents should notice an improvement, but we'll be monitoring, that resident feedback through the app, etc., to understand if that has occurred. So we're really interested in this next 3 months because all of the operational changes will start to come into effect, and so we need to understand if they're working and if residents are noticing a difference.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and I think I can sense some positivity around that. So fingers crossed that it will do something. And so we've also got a parallel process where we've got the Joint Council's Action Group, and that's City Council, Environment Canterbury, and supporting staff from both organisations. So Yanni, myself, and James Daniels are our representatives, and we have Chair Jenny Huey and Nicole Marshall from Environment Canterbury, and we are composing the latest newsletter to go out that we really want to word in plain English and tell people exactly what's happening, give them this timeline, things like that. And we're also going to organise a community group with a free and frank discussion. So you'll be involved in that, Yanni, as well, which will be great. We'll be able to tell people what is going on, and I think it's really important to see that there is something going on. There's tangible changes here, and in October, hopefully, we will see some big improvements. You've got a question, Aaron?
Yeah, just with your recipe changes, what are the differences? I noticed when I was in Dunedin earlier in the year, theirs had gibboard in it. So they, rather than send the gibboard to landfill, it gets broken up, crushed up and put in with their compost because it's 100% compostable, which is weird that we don't. But does that soak up the smell as well? Because I know that you use that in compost at home.
So as far as I understand it, we haven't changed the feedstock, so we're still accepting the same input material, which is obviously the curbside organics, garden waste and commercial food waste. What we've done though is we've isolated those feedstock streams so that we can understand the impacts of each material on the odour. So we're kind of just getting a better understanding of how our current accepted material operates through the plant and
rather
what
than
those potential
introducing,
sources of
rather
odour
than
are.
introducing new stuff.
Yeah, so
But don't we also have a parallel program where we're looking at putting paper through there?
yeah, so part of the research that we've been doing, came off the back of, I guess, the issues that Avril raised in the previous presentation, just around the markets for recycling. And so what we wanted to look at is, obviously, worst case scenario is we collect everything through the yellow bin and it has to go to landfill, and that cost is significant to council. So we want an alternative to that, and the idea being that we could process paper through the composting plant, rather than send it through the landfill, because obviously the processing cost is much lower, and you get an output that has a beneficial use in terms of application to soil. So that is part of the work that we're doing in these options.
So that'll come through in the November report.
Yes,
okay, that's good.
Yeah, or even at the end of October when we bring the CEA report.
Right, okay, that's excellent. Thank you very much. All right. Phil, just about to put it.
Sorry. Just one thing I'd like to say, just backing up what Yanni said. If you were Joe Public out there and we've got to the end of the 3 months and they're saying, oh, here we go again, I think we've got to be very clear what we tell the public in really down to earth numbers and figures and what have you in English, but have it so that November, when this report comes out, that's it. We won't kick the tin down the track anymore, because they're up to here with it. So I think we're pushing it, asking them to go out to November, but we've got to make a conscious decision that November will make a decision one way or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the really important thing here is to engage with the public and bring them along for the journey, rather than just say, oh, well, we've spent 3 months on it and we haven't solved it, or we're our work's ongoing. It's showing them why it's taking that amount of time. I think, we've got a Newsline article going out, and we've got the public engagement session happening shortly. So it's just about making sure that we communicate to the residents of Bromley what we are doing, and I guess what each change will cause in terms of the odour. So
yeah, that's great. All right, so it's been moved and seconded. Is there any debate? Yours was kind of a debate, Phil. Melanie?
I just wanted to comment on the process that's happened, and not to downplay the residents, but looking at what's happened, like coming from a science point of view, like this is looks like quite a scientific process. It's happened in a really short time, and if anyone, science is bloody slow. I'm actually quite impressed. So I really hope it has the outcomes that the residents want. And I just wanted to say, I never thought I'd see siftiness in paper in council, because I did a whole chapter on that in my PhD.
Yanni?
Can I just ask, are Becca being asked to do
we're in debate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let's just frame it.
Yeah. All right, well...
we'll go to debate then. Look, I think it's really clear that something's gone wrong with this whole thing, and we need to take action and appreciate there's work underway. I think what's really important for the community is that there is a degree of independence around the assessment of what goes on, because we've used people to do assessments in the past, and just using those same people to give us advice, new advice, isn't going to sit well with the community. So I look forward to getting the information back, but I do think at some stage we need to just understand how this decision was made to locate the plant where it was and to go with this contractor. There were other people that put forward options. There were assessments done at the time. There were reports coming to council that made it clear who would have responsibility for meeting the consent. And I think it's really important that we just kind of understand around the accountability of how this has gone so wrong, given it's a pretty significant operation for council, and the last thing we would want is to not be able to collect the organics, and we'd hate to see more waste go to landfill. So I think there's a real challenge ahead for us, but at least the work is happening. We just need to make sure that we're really communicating well to the community in simple key milestones about what changes are going to be made and when the difference is going to happen. And I think it's fair to say the adaptive management plan, that 3-month process failed. It didn't work. The stuff that people were promised when it was released has not occurred. In fact, the problem has gotten worse rather than improved, and I understand there's some scientific reasons behind that in terms of the compost recipe. But actually, from a community point of view, people are really fed up with this, so we need to make sure that we don't drop the ball and that we keep the pressure on to find a solution.
Thanks, Yanni. Aaron.
Yeah, like Yanni, I'll frame my debate with a question veiled inside it. And that's just around the presentation we had before on the yellow bins. I wonder when we will get a paper back to get some actions in order for us to make a decision on how we are going to tackle this head on, because that amount of contamination is unacceptable. And I think it's enough of just asking people nicely. We need to start either removing bins or bringing in a penalty, something. But it's got to, we have to draw a line in the sand, because to go from 3 trucks a year contaminated to now 42% is a phenomenal failure. That is phenomenal. And that has to be sorted. Excuse the pun. So the sooner we can get a paper back where we make a hard decision on how we get this in line, because there'll be a big percentage of this city that'll be really disgusted by that, and the fact that people are putting dead animals in their recycle bin. I could understand someone might put one in waste because you can put cooked ones in there, but it makes no sense. You can put your bones in that in there.
It's funny when you say
It's the delivery, it's not the material. Chair, I with you working with the staff can bring us something back that we can get our teeth into as soon as possible. Would be most appreciated.
I think we'll make a note of that. Thank you, and I totally agree with you, Aaron. It's disrespectful for a start, and it is actually costing everybody a lot more money. So we do need to address that. But I'd really like to thank you for the report, very good report, and also for all the work you're doing on the Living Earth issue. And I think we are seeing some progress, we're seeing some timelines, we're seeing some actions, and Yanni being on the joint council's working group there will be a real benefit as well. You'll be able to have oversight of everything that's happening. So I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? That's carried. Thanks very much. Okay, and we will move to item 11. Otakaro Avon River Corridor Waitaki Street Stop Bank Relocation Advancement. That nice short sweet title belies the work going on this. So welcome Keith and Tom and Adam again. Would you like to introduce this for us today?
So we have a short introduction, and if you have time, with permission, a very short presentation. That's okay?
Yes.
Okay. So just to go back a little bit and put a bit of context, we've been working on the last couple of years on improving the Avon stop banks in order to give enough time for the regeneration plan for the Avon corridor to be developed and delivered against. The regeneration plan came out last year, and when that came out we saw that as an opportunity. The opportunity being that if we were to deliver the Waitaki Street section now, or as soon as possible, then it saves us having to strengthen or improve that section of stop bank that was remaining when the regeneration plan was published. It also would have some other benefits that we're probably aware of some of those issues, but we can talk to that later if you wish. In late last year, we began some investigations in order to determine the feasibility of delivering against the regeneration plan. We now believe that we have a viable project, and we bring that to you today, and together with the recommendation seeking approval to progress this project rapidly. Since the report was written, there's just a couple of updates to give. Unfortunately, we were unsuccessful with our bid for the government's shovel-ready funding, so I'll just give reference to that. Next time.
Yeah, I'm not really surprised, I'm saying that's sad.
The second update is we gave a briefing to the Coastal Burwood Community Board last week, and just an update on that. So I think it's fair to say, and the members present will update or contradict if I've got it wrong, but the sense was that the Community Board was supportive of this project and the starting work on the regeneration plan. There was some comments that have been given since then, both in support of the project and very supportive of the project, but also giving some comments and seeking some reassurance on some points of detail, particularly around issues of detail such as planting, fencing, the walkways and trails within that, all of which we believe we can resolve during detailed design. But if you want us to go through all those particular points, we can do that afterwards with responses. But I believe that we can respond to the community board, just giving some reassurance.
I think
if you're
so.
okay with that.
Yep.
So that was as much as I want to say by introduction. But Tom does have a short PowerPoint presentation just to give a bit of context.
Thank you very much, and my apologies for the long report title. That's entirely my fault. I'll
Accepted.
This is a very similar presentation to what I gave the community board very recently. Just quickly here, this is a location map of where the proposed works are in the corner of Pages Road, Anzac Drive and the Avon River. Some of the reasons why we're seeking to prioritise this work are primarily around the existing stop bank condition. As Keith mentioned, it's been a very challenging piece of infrastructure to work on historically, and we'll think it'll be challenging to work on in the future. So if we focus on our long-term Avon region corridor work, then it avoids the need for doing so. There's high groundwater in the site. Obviously there's some history of poor drainage and poor access for the remaining resident there. On the plus side of changes more recently, there's been some good coastal vegetation growth in there with salt marsh starting to form, so that's an exciting glimpse into the future for the site. In terms of the IRC regeneration plan itself, this is just an excerpt from the plan showing the stormwater treatment facility, stop bank and tidal wetland in this area, and when I flick to the landscape plan in just a second, you'll see that it's pretty strong alignment between the ideas that were put forward in the plan and what we're proposing to do as part of the works. So what you see in front of you now is the landscape master plan that's been prepared. It includes a detention basin or detention pond on the bottom left-hand corner or the bottom corner of the site, so that collects the first flush from existing urban areas and begins the treatment process. Then those water flows through a treatment wetland and then out beneath Anzac Drive to the existing pump station that was constructed by Skirting, pump station 232. Beside the treatment facility, there is a new stop bank proposed, set back as far away from the river as possible in order to reduce the geotechnical requirements. And between the stop bank and the existing river is the proposed tidal wetland. And you'll notice that there are islands left between the tidal wetland and the river, and that's what would be left of the stop bank after we cut holes in it to let the river into that tidal wetland area to help that form very naturally. So the stop bank's located where it is because we're constrained obviously by Anzac Drive and Pages Road and the amount of footprint we need for the stormwater treatment device. So what we will have to allow for in the future, and I'll talk about this in a minute, is the Bexley Landing that's not proposed to be delivered per se through this project, and the Pages Road Bridge realignment. We are getting quite good at building these things. We built a few of them recently, as you'll be aware. In the top left-hand corner, you'll see the Bullers Stream wetland. So the wetland component of the proposed treatment facility will look similar to that, and an aerial photo of that same site shown in the bottom left-hand corner. On the top, on the right of the screen, are some shots of Charlesworth Reserve, both from the air and from the ground. And that will be very much the sort of outcome we're seeking from the tidal wetland component. And in the middle at the bottom is Te Oranga Waikura, in Linwood Lower Fields old site. So those are the sort of outcomes we're looking to achieve in terms of a landscape perspective and what you might envisage it looking like in a few years' time should you give the approval to proceed. In terms of those uncertainties with the project, we're still working through access for 92 Bexley Road and how we might tie that in to best meet the needs of both that resident and also access for maintenance and for the existing utilities that are still on the site. We have in that left-hand circle on the aerial photograph there's some existing Orion infrastructure, and exactly how we tie the new stop bank into the existing stop bank is still something that's we're working through the detailed design. There might be some challenges there associated with that existing Orion infrastructure. There are a number of other unsettled properties with regards to utility providers owning land across the site, so we're still working through that. And as I mentioned earlier, there's other projects on in the vicinity, being the Pages Road Bridge realignment and the Bexley Landing. So we've just got to leave enough space for those activities to occur in the future, and do our best not to try and have to rework things later. Certainly don't want that going on. Right. The other uncertainty we're still working through is the first part of the treatment facility, whether or not that's an open water space or more a planted basin rather than a grass basin. So that's just something you might have seen annotated on the landscape plan. There's still a little bit of uncertainty there. Subject to your approval today, the next steps would be keeping the detailed design going, hoping to finish that up this calendar year and progress into securing the necessary resource consents and building consents for the work to proceed, and all going well, starting work early, well, going out to tender early next calendar year and starting on work on site soon thereafter. And that's all I have for you today.
Great, thank you very much. It certainly looks exciting. I've got questions coming up, but I'd just like to ask you a question about the mana whenua. Any response back yet?
Not that I'm aware of, unfortunately.
Right.
So we have applied through the usual channels for feedback, and we're still working on a process, I understand.
So you're working with Shane here as well on that?
Yes, absolutely. We've had briefings with Shane about the project. And
right. And also the other question, the OPEX of anticipated of 250k a year, that's not in the LTP?
It's not in the current LTP. We certainly need to look at that in the upcoming LTP. Now, it won't actually be 250 a year. That's just what the smooth cost is. For OPEX, we're expecting for facilities like this to have pretty low maintenance over the first periods, but then you need to effectively come in and clean out the treatment facility and remove the contaminated material that's accumulated there. Mm-hmm. So that's quite a big job. So that might be, dredging a wet pond or getting into the wetland itself, removing the existing vegetation, clearing out the accumulated sediment which is contaminated, and replanting the site. So that's a pretty significant undertaking. But the wetland itself would be a decade away or more. The pond or wet basin at the start of the treatment facility, that's going to be far more frequent because that's where the sediment initially accumulates.
Right, well, that's interesting. Okay, well, we'll keep us informed with that. Right, now Sam had a question and then Tim.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good report and quite interesting. Just the thing I'm trying to get my head around is the finances. So, and I can't see the paragraph, but it said we've got potentially an under or over of 30% on the 12 million. And yet the recommendation is to allocate the budget over a certain amount of years and then give you delegation to manage that in existing budget. So would that mean if it blew out by 3.6 million, you would just find that within existing budgets, or would that come back to us?
Well, because we're trying to deliver this rapidly, as Keith mentioned, we are looking to manage that with an existing staff delegations, and I could be corrected on this, but I would understand that $12 million budget would sit with the CE.
Yeah, I think it's Dave, isn't it?
So, but the short answer is yes, the capital program is managed through existing staff delegations.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at is we approve it for 12 million, which to me does seem high, but if it did blow out by more, what's the visibility or the mechanism we have to approve that? Because we've been caught in the past with stuff. So I'm just a bit nervous about the recommendations in that respect with no oversight from either this committee or F&P.
So there is a number of watch list projects particularly which do get identified that keep a close eye on them. Finance and Performance Committee can always choose to select this for particular attention so that there's regular updates. There's different ways we can keep visibility.
So I guess, sorry, I'll ask it once more and then I'll leave it. But if we were to sign off the recommendations as they are today and this blows out by $3.6 million, does that come back to us for approval or not?
Any change requests go through the executive team. So, Caroline, I don't know if you want to
up
say
to council, over a certain amount up to council, and the size of this one would suggest that it would come through here.
But yeah, my question was, do the recommendations reflect that? Because it says delegate. No.
No.
Yeah.
So do you want to put a noting?
Well, no, I think you'd probably just remove that. Yeah.
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 And any changes?
Can I?
Yeah,
Yes.
you go on.
Well,
Do you want
just
to suggest-
reflecting on what has been said, because what has been happening in the past is that if projects are managed within a program and there is a shortfall, then it is taken from other parts of the program, and we get no line of sight over the setting of priorities for what is then diminished. But if there is money that is that if it comes in under budget, the same happens the other way around, and the swings and roundabouts rule does make it simpler from a staff perspective, but it removes governance oversight. So we need to find a balance that gives some degree of flexibility, encouraging always to come in under budget, of course, but with the ultimate requirement that the council's the one who sets the priorities for the program.
Certainly. May I just suggest that in considering that you might want to think about the existing staff delegations that are there for, and that the if there were some amount that were a flexibility that were considered appropriate, then you might wish to consider that. Just so, my concern really comes from if we're trying to progress this rapidly due to the condition of the existing infrastructure, that we have a reporting process that allows the project, and the governance oversight absolutely, but allows projects to continue to progress.
So I guess, Pauline, perhaps I'll just signal that on point 2, if we can just remove "and finances" within existing staff delegations. Yeah, or finances. It's just, I'd be far more comfortable setting a budget of 12 mil, and then if it goes out, they come back for more money. Or we reprioritise within the existing budgets, but I think we need to be able to see that.
Yeah, it gives you oversight.
Visibility.
Does that work for you, Keith?
Yes, certainly, we can come
Yep,
back
great.
if there's a change in forecast.
That doesn't solve the problem because the existing staff delegation.
That's true.
Should we set the budget, Sam, at 12 million, and if it comes back, and then,
But there's got a contingency of 30%,
and that's what I want to ask as well.
plus or minus, which would add another 4. Andrew, have you
Yeah,
got a
I mean,
suggestion?
30%.
Yeah, I mean, if what we're concerned about is that the budget's going to go above 12 million without any governance decision-making ability around that. I mean, oversight, yes, it can be reported back, but if you're moving quickly, it may well be that the any changes approved under existing delegations and within existing programme budgets, and then it's just reported to us as a fact. I think probably if what Sam is saying is, and I would tend to agree with him, that what we want is, if there's any increase in budget over the 12 million, that requires to be approved by whichever committee. It might be Finance and Performance, it might be this committee, it could be by council, it could be any one of the three if we're interested in doing it quickly. Then we should state that in the resolution, because just removing the words and finances within existing staff delegations, well, that continues to be a fact that within staff delegations those approvals can occur. So just removing it from a resolution doesn't change the environment that we're working in, which is that staff can approve changes within programmes of work under delegation. So I think if we're wanting any changes to budget above $12 million to be approved by council, this committee, finance and performance, then we should say that.
Well, can I just ask a question then? What is the existing staff delegation? So what could they, how much higher could you go above?
It's 5 million. 5 million.
5 million.
5 million.
You can go to, okay, well on that, I concur with Andrew.
So notwithstanding staff delegations, the committee to approve any expenditure in excess of $12 million.
Yeah.
That includes the contingent, that doesn't include the contingency, is that
Well, the contingency would then be void, wouldn't it? Unless it was under. If we're requesting that this come back for approval, should it exceed 12 million, then
But
the
then-
contingencies.
But then there's no contingency, because if the budget is 12 million and we're saying there's no contingency, because that's what I was going
Yeah,
one of the
30%'s a massive swing anyway.
Yeah.
So I'd
4 million.
And I think that's what
Come
we
back.
want to say. If it's going to be over 12 million, we want to approve it.
yeah.
Okay.
You're right.
So could 3 happen under delegation, or does it need... Does Resolution 3 have any effect, or could that actually just happen anyway?
Because doesn't that just go back into the program?
Well, the intention of that third resolution was such that the LDRP 521 Avon floodplain management implementation spans many, many years to do these activities set in as a program. So it'll be just making sure that any savings below the 12 million will return to that particular place for that particular purpose, being these facilities throughout the Otakaro River corridor and working on the stop bank network itself.
We're going through a significant LTP process which involves priority setting across all of the different programs and elements of our capital program. So I don't know that I feel comfortable with making a decision about apportioning this expenditure in advance of that process.
But surely any reductions in the budget in the land drainage recovery program would be at a program level. So even if that did go back in, it could still be reduced at a program level through the LTP.
I guess I'm signalling that I'm not comfortable with the program approach on all aspects of the work that we do and that is currently under programs.
I can see that, but that would be addressed surely in the LTP. But have you got other wording you want to put in there instead or suggest?
No, I'm happy to vote against number 3.
Carolyn, what would be your advice with if that money didn't go back into the program? Where would it go?
I suppose it's always the staff could be asked to advise on whether that money stayed within a land drainage overall or go somewhere else within the capital program.
That's right.
So it could go transport or facilities. Savings, yeah, correct.
All right. Can we just I think Leanne's going to vote against 3. 2, Andrew, how do you, with that wording, proof staff to manage the project?
Yeah, so my question on 3 remains unanswered, so we'll come back to that. But yeah, just to answer your question, Pauline, on 2, committees will approve any expenditure over 12 million will be sufficient.
Yes.
So to approve any expenditure.
Yep.
Yeah, that sorts that. But my question on 3, I mean, I certainly appreciate the point that Leanne's making, and I agree with it, and I think there's an approach that we need to take across the whole capital programme, but that's a different matter than how we deal with this one example that's in front of us before any changes that we might choose to make. If 3 wasn't carried today because a majority of people decided to vote against it, could that still happen anyway? Presumably, if we take a programme approach, then any remaining budget would go back into the programme and could then be applied to any other project within that programme, including the continuation of this one, regardless of whether there's a resolution of council, of this committee that says that or not.
That's right.
Or is that not the case?
It's my understanding that that could be the case, but we're just trying to provide that clarity here today, that the intention of any underspend would be remaining inside the river corridor to do similar works.
That's right.
This is actually an example of something that we need to deal with as part of the LTP around programmes of work and prioritisation of budgets, and actually speaks to achieving the whole capital programme from a fiscal viewpoint, even though the priorities may be quite different within that fiscal envelope. So that's something we need to pick up as part of the LTP.
Yeah. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. Just two fairly simple questions, really. What would be the average for, or the usual for a contingency? Because in your slide presentation, you gave there are some photos there of other wetlands that you've done. So you guys are actually pretty skilled up with what you're doing. So I'm actually surprised that a 30% contingency is actually there. And I would have thought, you know, we could have pulled it back to 10, because the 30% contingency has just stimulated a discussion about how much over the 12-year budget will have to come back, and now we've got to a position where we've got no contingency, and if it's over 12 million, it's got to come back. So I'm just wondering what would the usual be, and would 10% be the usual standard? I'm not sure.
Well, we have had to prepare this report in advance of the detailed design being complete, and certainly well in advance of the tendering process. So the cost certainty at this stage isn't as high as we would normally be at this point in the approvals process. So that is why we have put it at 30%. And as I mentioned during my presentation, there were some uncertainties still remaining inside the project from a scope perspective, not only just a market perspective in terms of the construction cost and what you have on the table. So exactly that sort of tying around that infrastructure that could, Ryan infrastructure, say at the upstream end or the western end of the site, could drive some budget requirements which aren't included in that $12 million, and hence the 30% contingency at this stage. So it wasn't, it was reflective of where we are at the project and the uncertainties we see remaining to completion.
So when you have a project with a detailed design, what is your normal contingency? I guess the question is.
Again, it will depend on, contingencies are really built around risk and understanding of risk for an individual project, but it wouldn't be uncommon to have, say, 10% at the end of detailed design. When you get to tendering and you have a price, depending on the nature of the contract, that might come down again.
No, that's great.
So
Thank you.
really is project.
Second question. 92 Bexley Road obviously seems to be a wee bit of an issue with regards to access. Has there been any discussion with, is it NZTA or whoever, with regards to access off, is it Anzac Drive with a left in and a left out? Because it seems ridiculous to have one property in there, to have vehicle access through a reserve, and surely it must add to the cost, because any access that is provided, as if it's a cycle lane or a path, isn't designed to take the weight of it, permanent of a vehicle full time. Whereas obviously with one house there, the access would have to be designed for 7 days a week access for a vehicle.
So have you talked to NZTA?
If I've understood your question correctly, yes, we are in discussions with NZTA. They haven't signed off or approved anything at this point of time. So, but we are signalling a desire to provide access to 92 Bexley Road off Anzac Drive.
And to make it simple and easier for NZTA to swallow, a left in and a left out would be the ideal, wouldn't it? Because if they would be abhorrent against anyone crossing the white line or the yellow line, depending on what it is.
Well, it's very much in NZTA's court to advise us on what they believe is appropriate, but we're certainly putting safety into those considerations about how best to manage that access.
But you'll be getting advice from our traffic engineers, I presume. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Good question. Yanni, and then Mike.
Yeah, I guess what I was concerned to read in here is that this is going to stop a number of other projects along the Heathcote and in St Albans and in Cashmere Worsley. So we're not being
stop them, but defer them.
Well, it'll delay them. And it seems a bit weird that we would agree to a project without explicit resolution to actually state what's happening with those projects other than just delaying. So, I mean, I just can't quite get my head around like the low stop banks. Have we got a report coming back on that about what's happening?
Yes, there is low stop banks are coming.
And why isn't that being done at the same time that we're taking money off that budget?
Well, inherently we're not taking money off any budget. It's about the timing of when that budget is available. So the LTP the current line item for Heathcote Low Stop Banks won't change in total value. It's just about the timing of that, and the same with these other projects. We're not looking to take money off any project to deliver this, but we just have to have enough headroom inside the program in order not to exceed our total program budget in any given year. It's not about exceeding a budget in total, it's about the timing of the money.
So it's about achieving a net zero carry forward. So if we're bringing money back, which we have in the future, it's offset by other carry forwards. Now, some projects such as Cashmere Worsleys and Cox's Quaves, fitting in with their timing, they have carry forwards naturally as part of it. It's not a forced delay. So that's just an offset that helps towards it. Right. The identification of the low stop banks, that's still one that's still requiring a council decision. And the intent is that we will arrange a working group with council to go through some of the issues before getting a formal decision on that. So that is that's been a challenging project, and it's taken us quite a while, but it's about doing it right and then getting the report put in front of council to make that decision. So it's all just a timing issue. And through the LTP and annual plans, if you agree any of these, then you can make other changes to compensate. It's a timing issue to make sure that everything nets to zero. That's what we're trying to achieve. It's not about forcing delays to active current projects.
So why is this one a priority? And how many people are at risk of flooding versus other LTR projects?
So this project we've put forward because it's in the regeneration plan, so it is a project. There's obligations around that, but it's come up because if we don't progress this now, then we will have to undertake maintenance of the stop banks. So there will have to be expenditure for that. So this is So this is saying that if we're going to do this, this is where the opportunities come up. If we're going to do this anyway in a few years' time, then we'll need to do maintenance costs now. But if we do this earlier, we don't have to do the maintenance costs. So overall, there's a net benefit. There's a net reduction in cost.
Right. And so what's the cost of maintenance?
So again, it will depend upon
we've had that answered already, Yanni.
Sorry, no, not the ongoing cost. If we didn't do the project,
yep.
How much are we looking at spending on the maintenance?
The OPEX.
No. If we didn't do anything here
costs.
and just left it,
what
would be the cost of doing the stop bank maintenance?
Yes, yeah.
So it depends how long as to where this project ends up being prioritised. So if it's still first off the cab off the ranks in the budgeted year, then we might have to spend up to $500,000 on maintenance now to protect the works. If it's not first cab off the ranks and it slips a bit further down, then we really need to be doing more substantive works, and that could be up to $2 million. So we're talking about reasonable numbers and about mitigating the risk against that. So that's the reason that we've come forward with this, and we've been working on this to put it up as an opportunity to try and save cost and reduce risk.
And I guess what I was trying to understand in terms of the flood risk is how does this compare to the other properties? Like I see the flood intervention policy is one that's also going to be delayed or deferred if we agree to this. So how does the risk in terms of flooding compare in terms of the number of houses impacted by this versus other areas in the city?
There is flood risk to properties. If there was, and again, we've got to be careful that we talk about possibility and probability, and we actually understand the differences. There is a possibility that there could be in a major event, king tide and everything else, perfect storm all comes together, an immediate stop bank failure. If you're thinking worst case, it all fails and everything comes through. In that event, there would be a significant amount of water would go across. It would flood across to Pages Road, Anzac Drive, and properties surrounding that area. That's a possibility. The probability of it occurring in that time is much less. So the chances of everything coming together at once, there being a catastrophic stop bank failure, is much less. So it's about trying to balance those probabilities up. But if we are to manage the risk, we would if this work stays with the current programme or is delayed further, then we would have to think about maintaining the stop bank asset. And if we didn't and there was a breach, then we would be exposing both the roads and surrounding property to risk of flooding.
Right, but what I was trying to understand is, are there other properties that are at greater risk in terms of possibility and probability that if we agree to this, don't get done? And with the flood intervention policy, for example, places along the Heathcote or wherever, is there anything there that would be of a greater risk in terms of possibility and probability?
Well, the flood intervention policy is there to, as per the policy, to protect against those properties that are of significant flood risk or have been actually flooded since the earthquakes.
Above floor. Above floor.
And that there's the capital project that might protect them is going to be somewhere off. So they're going to be exposed to unacceptable risk of frequent flooding during that period. The Heathcote, we've already purchased those properties. We made offers and purchased, so we have done in the Flockton area. So the immediate priority properties have already been given offers and dealt with under the policy. We don't currently have any planned properties that is currently budgeted against those years or forecast against those years to be making offers.
Okay.
So. And if we did have at that point, then we would put that forward again for balancing and moving on.
Right, so that's thank you. Mike and Phil, you've got one here. Mike, your question.
Thank you. A couple of questions. And actually, one that is pretty much the same as what Yanni was asking, and I still wasn't too clear on the answer actually. And obviously, this is prioritised in another area of the city over current projects that were budgeted to be started within a certain period of time, which now will get pushed out. So net neutral in terms of cost, but obviously some communities see a delay in land drainage projects in their areas. What I couldn't work out was basically what is the risk to properties in, say, St Albans and the lower Heathcote area, where we're now delaying those projects because of this project. Are there any properties that are at risk if there was a significant event in those two areas because of the delay?
Okay, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there is. So the St Albans Brick Barrel project is one where there is a natural delay occurring. So that's a naturally occurring carry forward. And it's again about taking the opportunity to balance the books. So it's not a forced delay of that project. And I think that with the low stop banks, again, that the project, should it be agreed, that relates to below floor flooding and street flooding. It's not an above property risk, so it's not intended to protect against that. So have we got...
In terms of the below floor, how many properties would be getting flooded in that lower Heathcote area below floor compared to what potentially could get flooded from doing this work?
But that's not part of the flood intervention policy.
Well, no.
That's the only thing that's being deferred.
It says in the report that I think the lower Heathcote stop banks or something are getting basically deferred, so we can actually spend money on this project, the Waitaki stop banks. But I want to know, if we had an event in those areas, which area would actually have more impact to the communities that live around there? So because above floor flooding's pretty bad, but also below floor has actual impacts too for the people that live there. And I just want to know that we're not actually putting other people's houses, I guess, at risk to try and solve another problem.
Well, and as I say, that's one of the reasons why the low stop banks, I know we didn't come here to talk about that, but happy to answer your questions. It's one of the reasons why that's a difficult project, and it's a difficult one to prioritise, and why we would like to have a working group or a workshop with you as council to consider, because below floor flooding and on property and street flooding is, through the land drainage recovery programme, has been considered a lower priority than above floor. And so trying to balance up, as you're suggesting, because we recognise that below floor flooding does have an impact, but it is a lesser impact than above floor flooding. And so that's something which as council, you know, there needs to be that debate and that discussion. And so we can present that to you and try and get a good steer.
I think that's due to come in December, round about.
How can you have this?
So it's not ready yet, the project. Yeah.
The other question, Knight's Drain. Would this project, if this project was going ahead, would you still need to do Knight's Drain?
The short answer to that is yes. Knight's Drain has a water quality component to it. The catchment that drains to that proposed Knight's Drain pond is different to the one that's being collected at the Waitaki Street treatment facility. So, yes.
Okay. And also, Pauline asked at the beginning about Mana Whenua being involved with this process, and actually their response, which hasn't come. Have we tried to contact them again to get that response knowing this report was coming today?
I'd have to confirm with the project manager, but I'll have to double check that, sorry.
So could you send a memo to us in response for that question? That'd be good.
Sure.
Thanks. Phil.
Yeah, guys, Mike's asked the question that I'm going to continue with. In the report that I've got in front of me here from Oricon, it said that the Knight's Drain ponds would be fine in the red zone, but we didn't own the red zone. But obviously we're going to own the red zone by the time we do this job, because I know a little bit about digging trenches in the red zone. It's not a good look. But on here, I think we should, because we're spending $8 million on the Knight's Drain ponds.
Currently on the budget it's 6.
6, okay, 6. Because the Knight's Drain has been doing its thing for the last 60 years that I can remember, I feel that we should look more at this Oricon report and getting it incorporated in this land now that we own this land, rather than doing it all on the other side of the...
Can you make it a question, Phil?
I did. That was a question.
Well, you said
have you thought about it?
In direct response to that, we now own the land that the Knight's Drain ponds are proposed to be placed. So we don't yet own the residential red zone, is my understanding. So we've already purchased that land.
Yeah.
It is for the treatment facility proposed there is there to address the catchment that contributes from Knight's Drain. If we were to switch the location of that pond to the river side of Anzac Drive, we would have to reduce the size effectively of what we're proposing for the Waitaki Street area, and then we would get a reduced water quality benefit out of it for the other, or reduce the catchment contributing to that site. And so it's a balancing act. We need a certain amount of land area to treat the total catchment. It can occur in different places with the right hydraulics, but if we weren't to expand elsewhere, then we wouldn't achieve the water quality objectives we're looking for.
So that you would know about this Oricon report from a long time ago. So how much have we spent on the Knight's Drain side of the river already on the land?
2.558 million.
Okay, so
it's the spend to date. So that includes all the design works, the purchase of the land, the demolitions, all of that. And the overall forecast to completion is just under 6.8 million.
Okay, because what I'm asking is that did we give any in this report? It says access to the rural red zone at this stage would be highly uncertain. That's because we didn't own it. We now own it. So why are we still spending money on the other side of the road? Did we spend money on the other side of the road in the Knight's Stream bit because of this report saying that we couldn't get to the rural red zone?
Well, in part, that if we look forward from today, we own or have access to all the land, and we will have to enact construction works that you're all familiar with, and dig the holes, and all that forward-looking cost is going to be required to potentially a similar degree, whether or not we construct the Knight's Drain site specifically, or try and relocate that facility into the red zone. Now, there could be some opportunities to alter the layout or orientation or size of that facility,
or not do it.
Well, if we didn't do it, we wouldn't achieve the water quality outcome, and we wouldn't treat the stormwater coming down Knight's Drain. And inherently, we need to do that in order to meet our
Is that important? I'm sorry, Pauline, I'm getting off track. But
You
I'll
are,
leave
I
it
was
there.
just about to haul you back in because
Yeah.
I think we should actually stick with the project that we're talking about, and you could take that offline. Leanne?
The challenge is that people, have looked at clips of the previous report that came to the council and seeing that at the time the red zone was ruled out for largely because we didn't have access to it. But it made it sound as if it was an alternative. But what we're hearing from you today is that it's not actually an alternative because it wouldn't clean the water that's coming from the Knight Stream.
Yes, essentially we're looking to try and treat as much of the Avon River catchment urban area as possible. In order to do that, we need more than one facility, and they will be dotted and occupy considerable percentage of the residential red zone or the Avon River corridor. And if we were to move, say, the Knight Strait drain pond into the residential red zone, well, that might mean that that's occupying an area allocated for stormwater management from a catchment we're looking to treat. So we'd have to offset that somewhere else in the red zone in order to get the same water quality outcome.
Yeah.
So I don't think that there could be some opportunities there for optimising maybe the hydraulics in some way, to do with groundwater levels and total excavation depths, but as it stands with this facility, you would have to get the water underneath Anzac Drive from Knight's Drain itself and then back under Anzac Drive to the pump station.
Yeah.
So we'd have to do quite a bit of work in Anzac Drive. Yes, but then we'll be asking
but that wouldn't
pipe
be
to
sufficient capacity.
use flow water in both directions, and then we might need to push the water underneath Pages Road as well to start. I presume that would be the opportunity, is to expand this treatment facility to the south side of Pages Road. Of course, then we'd get into questions around the land use and zoning, because we have a small area set aside in the regen plan for.
So I think you've been pretty clear about it, but that's really useful. My question is around 92 Bexley Road, and given that we don't own that property and won't, because it wasn't sold to the Crown, isn't it the Crown's responsibility to pay for the costs of the ingress and egress, in and out? Surely, because it's not our property.
The team hasn't been in discussions with Crown about the potential for cost recovery associated with land access to
I think it's worth, because I don't know whether we've talked to the landowner, whether they've decided that they'd like to sell the land, but I don't know. So, this wouldn't be appropriate to have the conversation in this environment, but I just wonder whether that could be just noted as something that might want to be reflected on by appropriate authorities higher up in the organisation.
Take a note of that. All right. Well, that's been an interesting discussion. You want to move it, Jan?
No, I just wanted to ask one question around, is this a hail site?
Essentially where the Bexley landing is proposed, there is some contaminated land there. We're not looking to excavate into that through this, into the contaminated material itself. But in fact, we may be looking to deposit more material on top of that as part of the works, because we are trying to minimise the amount of excavated material we take off site in order to manage cost. So that is one area of known contamination. We've in fact done a investigation into contaminated land, and there was some other asbestos found in limited sites and some other pesticides and other sort of other contaminants that might be typical of urban areas. So we've sort of investigated it, isolated pockets is what we found.
And just the low stop banks, I'm just trying to understand when that report, is that coming back in November or December?
It'll be either of those. I don't think we've decided on that yet, but there'll be a workshop anyway, so there's more work to be done on that.
It's just I find it hard to agree to something today without knowing what the impact of that. Like it might be completely fine, but it's hard to be in a decision making to delay that project without having the opportunity to understand what the impacts are. But I'm happy just to abstain on this today if that's easier rather than delay this meeting any further.
Do you have any other
comments? It would be good to get
because obviously
timeframes.
Yanni's concerned that to support this today could be disadvantaging a project, another project. I know you have given some answers, but I guess what we want to hear from you is that it will not disadvantage that project.
Well, look, my suggestion would be that if, as part of, to balance the funding, there's changes and delays to the funding for the low stop banks. When you make a decision might be not to build low stop banks, in which case there's no issue. If the decision is to build stop banks, then you actually have a choice as council. Do you stick with the funding where it is, or do you bring it back and then offset it with something else? And again, it's about that constant prioritisation. I think that you have opportunities there to consider your options. And I think that with low stop banks, it is a difficult one because it is hard to give a definitive prioritisation to it because it's dealing with underflow flooding, and we're trying to compare it against projects with above flow flooding, and that's when it becomes quite difficult.
Right. Okay. So, James, one final question from you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Tom and team, for your presentation. I do have a question, and obviously this is of great importance to me because this is part of the ward that I represent. It's right on the boundary, and some significant events of it occurred there over the years and even more recently. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that is actually the title of a song, but I mean it when I ask you, and I may have even asked you the other night at the community board. In 25 words or less, song title, can you tell us why this needs to be brought forward?
Fortunately, I don't have 25 fingers to count those words on, but the condition of the stop bank is such that we're looking to accelerate the project and seize an opportunity to avoid, avoid spending excess money on the existing infrastructure.
Thank you, because I think that's the simpler that we state, the more simple statement makes it easier to get our heads around, and that was 23 words.
Would you like to move it?
And at this point, I'd like to move this motion.
Seconded by Sarah. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Yep. That's what I'm asking for. Debate. Yes. Yep.
Look, I'm actually going to vote against this, and simply because of the wording in 7.6, there will be delays in the start of two land drainage projects. One being
separate. Yep. Carry on.
Am I allowed to start?
Yes.
Yeah, I will start again if I can. Thank you. Look, as I said, 7.6, there would be delays in the start of two land drainage projects, one being the brick barrel replacement at St Albans. The second one, which is obviously more important to me, is the Heathcote low stop banks, but also the wording, rephasing of some funding for the Cashmere-Worsley's basins. We've been dodging a bullet for some time since 2014. And I don't know how many people here remember 2014. Some of the houses around the Heathcote, I went and visited almost every house that was bought out, and I went with staff. And I appreciate Keith and Tom's presentation today, but when we say, oh, well, we've bought out the low-lying ones, but the ones beside them that weren't bought out, that had water lapping under the floors, because our policy was very clear and very clear that we could not buy the ones unless the flooding was above the floor. But those families affected by the flooding around them and lapping at the floor are still there. And so I would be, without further information, I can't support this. And I am disappointed because if you look at the presentation and you look at the aerial, I don't see how many houses compared to the Heathcote would be flooded. And to say that Anzac Drive is a major road and it can be flooded and could affect, doesn't affect homes. And so I will not be supporting this today. Thank you.
Leanne and then Sarah.
I just want to back this report. I think that it does do what we're expecting of the organisation, which is to look to the consequences of not proceeding with a project, and this one I think very clearly meets that test. If it is to remain in the program where it is or be subject to potentially further pushing back, then we will face substantial costs which will be sunk costs. They won't add any value, and this is an area that does require attention. It isn't just about the houses, although there are actually a significant number of houses on the other side of Anzac Drive. It's an incredibly low-lying area. You just need to look at Pages Road as it goes from the bridge down into its little basin and then all the way up Pages Road until it pretty much hits the pump station, which is on higher ground. It's an extraordinarily low-lying area, and to put that area at risk does cover a significant number of houses along Pages Road and further back into the Aranui area. I think that the other issue that really has hit home for me is the significance of the cutting off of access around Pages Road that occurs on a regular basis now, and with those major storm events subject to increasing frequency and severity, coupled with a king tide. It has happened before and it will happen again. You know, I think that this is very good, wise decision making. So I'm very much in favour of the proposal. It looks great. I know that you haven't managed to get the feedback from Ngāi Tuhuriri yet, but having engaged with them quite significantly over water issues, the fact of cleaning up the water that is going to be discharged into the river from our stormwater networks is really going to make a significant difference and certainly improve both the quality of the water and the quality of our relationship. So I'm very appreciative and will support the motion.
Sarah.
Thank you. I can understand Councillor Scandrett's concerns, and it's always something we need to think about when we're starting to juggle projects around in time and what the impacts of those are. We have spent significant time and resources on the Heathcote River catchment on the flooding issues in recent years, and we have seen the impacts of those starting to occur where we had that very wet spot during winter and we didn't get the flooding that we would have got in the past, and we can see some of those things really coming to fruition now. Now that we are so close, so close to owning the Avon-Takaro River corridor on behalf of the community, it really is time for us to start looking at what we do here and start actually getting, I guess, quick wins in an area that really needs it. This is the main entrance into New Brighton. It needs some love. It needs flood protection, and we do need the stormwater quality enhanced for our global stormwater consent. So I'll be voting in favour.
Excellent.
And note that we've split 2 and 3 off, and I think James was we're moving 1 and 2.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Melanie, then Sam.
I was going to say pretty much what Sarah just said, which is, I mean, the thing that seems clear to me if we're concerned about costs and ratepayers is if we can save money in maintenance costs on a stock bank that needs a lot of work, then we should do that. And as Sarah said, you know, and the Heathcote's my ward as well. You know, a lot of work has already been done. We've had the dredging, the flood intervention policy, they've worked on the banks, and they've worked on the storage basins. I mean, there's been so much work there, and as far as I can tell, nothing's happened in this area. So we really need to Yeah, work on it.
Yeah, thanks, Pauline. I'll be supporting it as well. And I think at a really fundamental level, you know, across council, we do need to make some really hard choices as we approach the long-term plan in terms of our priorities. Completely get what you're saying, Tim, in terms of this. But I think, you know, the staff in a way should really commend it on this, because it's seen that it's a really good opportunity to save some money long-term. I think the thing that sold it for me was the real need that if we can, and, you know, provide that capital investment over the next couple of years, that we potentially save the ratepayer $2 million in maintenance costs. So a $12 million capital injection versus a $2 million sunk cost, I think is a real no-brainer. And I think the other thing that's given me comfort, and it's why hopefully it gives other councillors comfort, is I think the changing in the recommendations, which reflect, I think, a message, if this goes through today from the council, that we expect them to deliver within that $12 million. And I think that's kind of the approach we need to start taking to a lot of this, is that actually, you know, there can be minor delegations to amend work programs, but fundamentally when reports come up saying there could be a 30% swing on stuff like this, that actually we need to put a lot more control around it so that we're not, or so that we're protecting ratepayers. So I really hope people support it. It's a sensible approach, saves us long term, and I think there's enough control within those recommendations to ensure we don't have massive budget blowouts.
Thank you. Yanni.
So I appreciate that there's a need for thinking about the maintenance costs. Actually, you can go around the city and find heaps of examples of where things are having to have money spent in regards to maintenance because we can't afford to do the permanent solution. There's a number of roads actually, and just up the road, ironically, we've got erosion happening along South Shore, which I don't know when we're going to start getting the plans for that, but that seems a very real kind of thing that's happening. I think for me, the key issue with this report is we should not be getting reports that affect other projects without getting really clear information about those other projects. And that's why I'm going to abstain on this today, because I actually think there's other projects that we need information on that this project impacts on that we don't have. So I don't think we can make a good decision. We hear about the idea of being smarter in how we do things, and I totally applaud us in taking that approach. But what would have been smarter for this project is to have the Pages Road Bridge designed at the same time as the cycleway, as the Knights Drain pond thing across the road. If you think about the money we're spending in this quadrant, which must be getting close to 50 or 60 million all up, it's a massive amount of money, and yet we don't have an overall plan for it. We're going to do 4 different projects, all individually, without any overall concept. So, you know, I am a bit concerned that we seem to be numb to the cost of some of these projects, and it just seems a very expensive way to address something that, you know, I appreciate it's important and I want to see a good outcome for the community, but we definitely don't have, I think, sufficient information about what's happening here to be able to vote on this today, both on the terms of other projects that it impacts on, and also actually for this geographic area. So I'll be abstaining.
Thanks, Yanni. All right, anybody else? I'm going to have to find a mover and seconder for 3, which has been separated out. I'm happy to move 3. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Melanie. All right, so that's been a really good debate, and I think that, you know, as Leanne pointed out, this is the fiscally responsible option to take to support this today. And we've got a really good land drainage recovery program team here that's been working for many years on our flooding levels to bring them back just to pre-earthquake levels, which weren't even that flash anyway. And I have a lot of faith that you are very capable of prioritising work programs so that you're not disadvantaging another project by deferring it a little bit and bringing some forward that perhaps are more worthy or more fiscally prudent to deliver earlier. So I'm comfortable with that. And this project is we are very, very bound to honour the agreements and the conditions in our comprehensive stormwater discharge consent, and this project will really help to address that, which is really commendable, and it also fits in nicely with the Red Zone Regeneration Plan and the Otakaro Avon Stormwater Management Plan. And we have support from the Community Board as well, and I'd like to have them stay involved if possible, and if there's any opportunity for community involvement to help with plantings there I think it'd be really good to pick that up as well, because to get communities involved in these things, even in a small way, actually gets buy-in, and then they get used and appreciated and owned. So if there's any opportunity there. And thank you for putting the other examples of these types of floodplains in the presentation. The feedback that I'm getting from the community about them is overwhelming. People are, when they discover them, like the one round by the Lady Isaac village there, people are really blown out. Oh, this is amazing. So it's really lifting the quality of our environment, our ecology and our water. So thank you very much for the amazing work that you are doing. So on that note, I'll put the motion. Oh,
as a mover, do I get the last?
You can, yes.
Kia ora. Look, I understand and respect the views of those who may not be able to support this today, particularly Councillor Scandrett has already raised what his issues are with this, and as I say, I accept and respect that. Also note Councillor Johansson's kōrero about the overall design. I get that too. And let me say that as a first-term councillor, I learn so much each time we do these things, and I go, oh, the penny drops on a few of these things. So I do hear what you say, and I appreciate that it's a learning environment for me. However, I do want to make the point that this project will be, if passed, very, very significant for the community out past Anzac Drive, and it'll have a flow back effect on those on the city side of Anzac Drive as well. It's going to have an enormous benefit, but some of it will be community well-being and the way that they and we feel about our community, our local community and our city. That's what's going to be so important about this. I also just want to say that this is not just about property. Quite rightly, people asked about, how many houses will this protect and so on. It's not just about property, it's about people. And it's about the safety of people who have been walking along Pages Road until I won't mention the trench.
No, don't.
Yeah, okay. So, as a final statement, I just want to say that I appreciate those councillors who have made known that they support this and why they do, and I would like all councillors to think about that. And that's my lot.
Kia ora. All right. I'll put 1 and 2. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. And you abstaining? Opposed? Mike and Yanni abstain, and 1 opposition from Tim. That's carried. And I'll put 3. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
So I support, Melanie support, put your hand up, and Anne, and the rest opposed. Thank you, so that's lost. All right, so that brings us to the, thank you very much, team. That brings us to the end of the meeting. I'll do the closing karakia. Tukuna te wairua ki rere ki te taumata. Ko te matatika, matapono, hiarahi ina mahi. Ka arotahi, te tira kia e ki punuku, kia e ki tangaroa. Homai, huie, tai kie. Kia ora. Thank you very much, guys. That was a really good meeting. We've got a briefing now. Do you want to take a 10-minute break? Yeah.